Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and in all of this Mueller Report and Russian collusion and everything that's been going on for the last couple of years, there has been a forgotten felony that nobody seems to be talking too much about, and that is the felony that was committed against General Mike Flynn. Yep, the whole thing that started it all was really when Flynn's name was unmasked. Yep, that was a felony. And then this article also talks about David Ignatius of the Washington Post, and that's why it's talking about Ignatius hypocrisy. Because if you look at this, David Ignatius of the Washington Post poses the interesting question of what responsibility, if any, a journalist has to avoid blowing secrets. While this question was once posted by Ignatius in a Washington Post article written back in 2000 that falsely accused Bill Gertz, then of the Washington Times, of blowing secrets, the question needs to be asked of Ignatius himself, given his articles attacking former National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn, retired, based on classified information illegally leaked to him. And this was written, by the way, on, I don't see it, but up here at the top it says April 7th, 2019. So I think maybe that's when the post was written. So anyway, let's go on. After all, it was David Ignatius, not Bill Gertz, who published articles highlighting the intercepted communications of incoming NSA Flynn, starting on January 12, 2017. And who was still president then? Yeah, it was not Trump yet. So anyway, this was an excerpt from that. According to a senior U.S. government official, Flynn phoned Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak several times on December 29th, the day the Obama administration announced the expulsion of 35 Russian officials, as well as other measures in retaliation for the hacking. What did Flynn say, and did it undercut the U.S. sanctions? The Logan Act, though never enforced, bars U.S. citizens from correspondence intending to influence a foreign government about disputes within the United States. Was its spirit violated? The Trump campaign didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. If the Trump team's contacts helped discourage the Russians from a counter-retaliation, maybe that's a good thing, but we ought to know the facts. Now, I read that because I want you to keep that in mind as we read through the rest of it. Whoever conveyed the information contained in Flynn's conversations to the Washington Post committed a felony. As Greg Jarrett explains, those individuals had special access to the content of telephone conversations between President Trump's now former National Security Advisor, General Michael Flynn, retired, and Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak. Those discussions were secretly recorded by American intelligence agencies. The tapes were classified documents. Now remember, they did that, and they were supposed to keep the American part of the conversation all masked, so they should not have known who the person was, and it would require a definite act to unmask his name. So it goes on. Jarrett continues, the Post reporter, David Ignatius, who published the classified material, may also be prosecuted, but he should not be. While I agree with Jarrett partially, I think a discussion needs to be had over the protections journalists are given when they publish classified information in order to sabotage an incoming presidential administration. That's kind of where I am, to be honest. I understand that they need to be able to publish things, but when they're doing it purposely to sabotage an election, that should be election meddling, and that should not be allowed. And when they put out secrets that could endanger people, I think that should not be allowed either. So, some of the stuff that they've been putting out has caused irreparable damage to people, especially like Mike Flynn. I mean, wow, so much has happened to him, and he didn't deserve any of this. Surely affecting the continuity of government by creating a false narrative based on selective classified leaks fed to you by criminals within our intelligence agencies and published as news should negate any protection you would have received under the First Amendment. See, there should be something. I mean, these people should not get away with it, because it's not that they were reporting facts. They were actually making things up. I mean, they were creating news instead of just reporting news. And I think when they're doing that, that should not be legal. Yet Ignatius wasn't done, as we saw a few weeks later in a subsequent story, that the leaked conversations were corroborated by, quote, 9 current and former officials who were in senior positions at multiple agencies at the time of the calls, and who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss intelligence matters. And here's the whole thing. I'm not going to read all of it, but basically he goes through and he says these things, and then he says 9 current and former officials who were in senior positions. So, these 9 current and former officials. Now, think back to what we know now, okay? This was back when it actually happened. So this was back in 2017. And now that we know what we know about what was going on in the upper levels of the FBI and with Brennan and Clapper, you got to start to wonder who these 9 current and former officials were and why in the world they felt like they could talk about this, even though they were not supposed to be referring to Flynn because his name was covered. And to unmask him without reason, and they didn't really have the reason, it constituted a felony. So talking about this really was a felony. There's 9 more felonies. We're up to 10 for starters, and all within the first few weeks of 2017. I wonder how many of these people are still in the positions they were 2 years ago. Well, we know some of them have been removed. When they sabotaged the incoming administration via leaks to reporters like Ignatius, aimed at taking out people like Flynn, for their not to have been an immediate investigation of where the January 12, 2017 leak came from is truly remarkable. But then again, when the government itself is committing the felonies, maybe it's for the best. Particularly if the special counsel's investigation is going to cite Ignatius's January 12, 2017 article in Flynn's own sentencing memo. I've talked about that before. They make up a lie, they report it to the press, they leak it to the press makes it into this big story that's all based on a lie, and then they publish it. And the people who leaked it in the first place point to it and say, see, it's in the press, so it must be true. That's exactly what the wrap-up smear is. And I have a video on that, and if you haven't seen it, it's well worth watching, because Nancy Pelosi basically just outlined exactly what it was. Now, she was blaming the Republicans and saying they were the ones doing it, but the Republicans don't have the press in their pocket, and the Democrats do. So we know who does it. You're not fooling us, Nancy. This was a tweet by Nick Short, the guy that writes this column, and he had an interview here that took place between Mark Levin and Devon Nunes. And I'm going to play that for you in a minute. And notice what he says here. Nunes brings up an important point regarding David Ignatius of the WAPO. He first received the illegal leak of Flynn's intercept on January 12, 2017. For there not to have been an immediate investigation of where that leak came from is truly remarkable, given that it's also a felony. And if you look at this, here's the actual tweet. And I'm going to play this for you. And the video quality on this is not the greatest, so, you don't have to worry about adjusting anything on your screen. It's just kind of fuzzy. But I did want to play it for you, so I'll blow it up full screen and we'll see how it goes.
They pick up Michael Flynn. And what they're supposed to do under our statutes, our FISA statutes and so forth, is to only unmask under very extreme circumstances. And even then, to keep that name protected. And instead, it's leaked. Mm-hmm. And even go further. The accounts of conversations raised the prospect that Mr. Flynn violated a law against private citizens engaging in diplomacy. They're talking about the Logan Act, which has never been successfully used in 200 years. It's unconstitutional.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. But here's my question to you. Sally Yates, the former Deputy Attorney General under the Obama administration, she would become the acting Attorney General for a short period under Trump. She kept pushing this Logan Act as an excuse to have a widespread investigation of Trump world.
Well, if you go back, there's actually an article that was written. So it was David Ignatius who first broke this, which was an illegal leak.
Yes.
And then a few days after, maybe a week after, there was another story where they leaked specifics of the call. This was before I believe this was even before the inauguration. And at that time, for there not to have been an immediate investigation of where that leak came from. I mean, that should have been that should have been fire alarms going off everywhere to go and figure out how that leaked out, because this was a very sensitive intelligence capability that we have in this country that nobody seemed to be worried about that this had jeopardized anything. Why? Because they were going after the Logan Act, something that's never been used before, a statute that's never been used. It's a 200-year-old statute. This is really bad stuff that they were up to, and they were willing. It shows that they were willing to use any piece of the law that they could find, including one that's centuries old, in order to justify their illegal leaking, because somehow Michael Flynn was going to be an agent of the Russians. And this is a guy who had a 3-star general who had a storied career.
Okay, so this was posted on March 5th of 2018, so I'm not sure exactly when this interview was, but even back then, and like I said before in one of my videos, that when we saw these things at the time, we didn't really understand the magnitude of what was going on. And so for those people who say, well, what's taken so long? Well, look where we were back then. We didn't understand what Devon Nunes was really saying, but now we know the kinds of stuff that he saw and why he was outraged about it. And this whole thing right here should have been addressed, but it wasn't. Why wasn't it? Because those in charge of the investigative body of our Department of Justice refused to do it because they were for Hillary and they were part of all this garbage going on. They were likely the ones who leaked it. You know, there were 9 of them. So, yeah, I can imagine that. And I tend to think that those are probably the names of the people, you know, that were in the criminal referrals that Jim Jordan and Devon Nunes have been talking about. Yeah, I'm pretty sure those people's names are on there. So what are we left with today is hypocrisy and unaccountability rather than law or any sense of justice. Moreover, read Ignatius's column written after Flynn's sentencing, where he boasts about his January 12, 2017 article being used by the special counsel as he marvels at how the relatively small matter of the Logan Act, a narrative that he himself started at the behest of his source, woo, right there's the wrap-up smear. Yeah, you fabricate something and then you let the press have it and the press prints it and then you point at the press as part of it. So, at the behest of his source, as part of an information operation on Flynn, resulted in Flynn's downfall. So yeah, Flynn was set up majorly. And I think we all probably know that at this point. And then here's just another clip from it. And he mentions it all down here. He promotes the Logan Act. And, you know, this is the Washington Post. This is what they do. And this is how they work. You know, they're very good at the wrap-up smears. They are the people that work for the DNC. When the DNC wants to target somebody, they contact the Washington Post and say, hey, write a hit piece on this person. And they do, and that's how it works. The DNC then point at it and say, see, look, it was in the Washington Post, so it must be true. Anyway. At the end of the day, someone from the Obama administration committed a felony by leaking the contents of Flynn's intercepted communications to Ignatius on January 12, 2017. This kick-started the bogus Logan Act narrative, which was pushed by former disgraced Attorney General Sally Yates to go after Flynn. Why haven't they or any of the 10 anonymous leakers been brought to justice yet? Well, we know the reason for that, but let me just read these 2 tweets that he has here. Thoughts on Flynn. Intel agencies leaked Flynn's phone call, violated interrogation procedures, discouraged use of a lawyer, overruled agents who said Flynn didn't lie, bankrupted Flynn, and coerced a guilty plea out of him for answering a question I don't remember. And he said that back in December 18th, 2018. And then down here he has another one where he said, quote, reporters who traditionally go bananas at this kind of prosecutorial misconduct don't object because they're not mere observers of the Flynn information operation, but willing participants, starting with David Ignatius of WAPO. WAPO and others spun Kislyak call as horrific violation of Logan Act, thus providing intel agencies with pretext to interrogate Flynn about the agency's own leak. Media collusion with corrupt and politicized intel elements is neither normal nor tolerable, or at least it didn't used to be. And again, that was back from December. He's right. It's just this, they were part of it. These, quote, reporters were part of all of this. They weren't reporting news. They were part of the propaganda machine. So anyway, that's the end of the article. I wanted to point that out to you because I think that in all of this hullabaloo that's been going on, we have forgotten this man right here and the felony committed against him. That is the one crime we know occurred, for sure. And it was done to target him and get him out of the entire administration because Flynn knows where the bodies are buried. But if you've seen one of my other videos where I go through his plea bargain, there's an interesting clause in there. And I'll have the link to that down below so you can go see it if you want to. But that particular video shows that in his plea bargain, it has him working on covert operations with law enforcement. And that's what he's been doing. And I think one of the reasons this has taken so long, and I know that was the question this guy had, why has it taken so long for anybody to be prosecuted? Well, first of all, our government always moves slowly. And so things have been moving, they just have been moving slowly because that's how our government works. But a major reason, I think, was that Flynn was doing a lot of covert operations, working behind the scenes, helping to put down evidence to get these sealed indictments that are out there. So I think Flynn just wasn't done yet, and they hadn't had all the cases built that they needed to build. Remember, when this all starts, it's going to be like an avalanche. It's all going to come rumbling down all at once when it happens. And they needed to get things set up first so that when it starts, it's not piecemeal and they can make sure that they get them all. And so I think they've been building cases, they've been presenting them to grand juries, and they have been getting these indictments. But again, they're sealed, so we aren't to know what's in them. Nobody knows what's in them. And we don't even know how many that are put on the dockets are actual indictments and how many of them are other sealed proceedings. I mean, they could be like witness testimony. They could be, objects like Wiener's laptop for a while was a sealed proceeding that was on the dockets. And they finally got that unsealed in May of last year, May 16th of 2018. And so, all of these different things that have been going on, they've been collecting evidence, they've been building cases, and it took a long time because this is so massive. And I think even now, we don't really understand just how big this is and just how pervasive in our government all of this is. The people who are yelling the loudest right now are the ones who are going to end up being connected to this in some way. And they will be forced to, give up their positions because of it. There's just not going to be any way out for them. And so when you hear these people yelling and we want subpoenas and we want this and we want that and we're not happy with this, yeah, just remember, they really are fighting for their lives. That's the reason they're doing it. That's why they're yelling so loudly about it. Because if they can't get it stopped, they're going down. And not just going down, they're going to prison, and some of them will be tried for treason. So we know that there's a lot of this going on, and we know that Flynn was targeted because he knew too much. Okay? And that's why they needed to get rid of him. Why did he plead guilty? Well, he was forced into it. I mean, they were bankrupting him. So, that's something. By the way, if you go to his Twitter feed, there is a link there where if you want to donate to him and his legal fund, you can do that. And so, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but if that's something that you think, you want to stand behind him, I think that's a good way to show support. So he will be exonerated, I think. In the long run, he will be exonerated. But he's had to go through a lot. I mean, imagine building up a reputation for years and years, your entire life, and you've built a sterling reputation, and then to have it torn down and to have people say horrible, horrible things about you. And that's really what's happened to him. I mean, I've heard liberals talk about Mike Flynn. It's not been nice. So, it's something to remember. Look at all those ribbons on his uniform. I mean, that guy, he's done a lot. He's done a lot for our country. He's sacrificed in many, many ways. And so I think that we need to remember him, and he will end up being a hero in all of this. But for now, it doesn't look so great. And the liberals latch on to that all the time. When I talk to them, they just want to say, well, Flynn pled guilty. And yeah, maybe he did, but he was forced into it. And even the FBI guys that interviewed him at first said he didn't lie. There were articles out there, on the internet that said the FBI said he did not lie. But then a few months later, all of a sudden Peter Strzok writes this new 302 and it says something different. So I tend to think that when this declassification happens of all the stuff, I think the original 302 will be in that group of things. And I think we'll see that they said he did not lie. And if he misspoke, then it was not purposely done. So, but he knows that, and he knows he's innocent. It just would be very difficult, when I think about it. It'd be really hard to have people tell, lies about you and have other people believe them. So that's a hard thing when you're put in that position. So anyway, that's what I've got for you on this one. I thought it was an interesting article. I wanted to bring it to your attention. I don't really read Ignatius that much because I just don't read the Washington Post. The least amount I can to get by. I mean, there's times that I will read some of their articles, but usually I try to steer clear of it because I know the bias is just so overwhelming, and they're not even biased anymore. They are just propaganda at this point because they can't stand the idea that Trump is innocent. Because if he's innocent, he's going to continue on with what he's doing, with just draining the swamp, and they're part of the swamp. So anyway, that's what I got for you. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.